everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Performance Cafe. And it's becoming a little wintry, so we're enjoying these warm cups of coffee in the morning. And today, as we've been going for the past couple of weeks, we're still on accountability. And today, what I'd like to talk about is accountability and relationship management. And the week ago, we were really talking about the necessity for understanding ourselves, for self-awareness, so we understand our own motivations, our behavior, and the moment that we understand this, we understand what triggers us, how do we respond to it, and how do we self-manage. And then last week we spoke about what are the boundaries and the expectations that we set. So we really spent those 2 episodes getting to great detail with ourselves. And as a manager or someone who's holding someone else accountable, what does that really mean for us? So today I would like us to take the next step, because you see, when it comes to accountability, it takes 2 to tango, as my mom would say, right? There are at least 2 participants in the relationship. And therefore, not only must each participant self-manage, but it's also important to implement relationship management, to understand how do these 2 halves come together. Now, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you'll recall we spoke about this in our first episode where we looked at emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence teaches us that we can sense, understand, and act appropriately to our feelings. But through that process, we can learn to sense, understand, and act appropriately to another's feelings. So, to give you an example, so often when people have gone through grief and loss, they'll say, oh, you won't understand because you've not lost husband, wife, mom, dad, child, animal, whatever the case may be. And people often feel like they're part of a club when they've gone through one of these losses, only because only the people who have had a similar loss really understand what they're going through. So in those cases, we find that there's a lot of appropriate management or relationship management, because when someone comes to you and they've been through a similar process, then you can understand where they're at. Why are they feeling that way? Sometimes you just understand some of the really crazy emotions that come around with grief. Now, when we talk about relationship management, that's very contingent on empathy. And empathy is not something that we like discussing in business environments. Why not? Because empathy is considered soft, touchy-feely. It's part of the soft skills. It's not taught in business management courses. And I think, I do love a good soapbox moment about the Industrial Revolution. And really at that point, with the Industrial Revolution, when people came into factories, they were treated like machines. And I always have this visual of people having to walk and leave their personalities, their lives, their situations, their feelings, their current environment at the door. Come in, be like a machine, do what you're told to do, and go home. Just don't bring your home stuff to work. Right? And then we go home, and then our spouses say, don't bring your work stuff home. But there's a lack of empathy in our business environments in a large case. And I think very often it is just because we don't get what empathy is. When something's happening to someone, whether they are feeling slightly fluish, whether they've lost someone, whether they are feeling overwhelmed in a project, what empathy is not is saying, so sorry. That's awful. Can I buy you a sandwich and then we can talk about the project that we're working on? Right? I am sorry is sympathy. Sympathy disconnects. Sympathy is kind of like, okay, I'm going to say one thing that's going to supposedly make this better, and we're just going to carry on as if this didn't happen. Right? That is not empathy. That is sympathy. It is really rather useless. I don't actually know of one place where sympathy works well. What we want to do is we want to reach and we want to feel empathy with people. Empathy creates a connection. So researcher Teresa Wiseman identified 4 different characteristics of true empathy. So the first one is empathy is your ability to walk in someone else's shoes. It's the idea that we can take someone else's perspective. I'm going to give you an example. I don't have children, but a parent will come to me and be concerned about the future of their child. Just because I don't have a child, I don't go, oh, well, I'm so sorry. Let me get you a sandwich and we'll carry on. We'll carry on with the work. What I do is I try and understand, what would it feel like for me if I was in that situation? What perspective do they have that I'm not getting? And in that process, I therefore do not judge, which is the second characteristic. I don't judge them for being upset or worried about their child. What I do is I respect the fact that they have this perspective and that because of it and because of their responsibilities, there's a part of their life that is unknown to me. The other thing that is part of being empathic is understanding and recognizing emotion in other people. You know those people that come to the office and they huff and they puff and they're full of nonsense and you go, is there something in the matter? And they go, no. So they shut down your ability to connect with them. But actually what they need is that connection because they need someone to hear them out, understand their perspective in a non-judgmental way, recognize what that emotion is because huff and puff is irritating and not great for the work environment. But when I'm recognizing that you're huffing and puffing because you are frustrated or feeling overwhelmed by the project, because you're worried about your child at home that's not doing well, right? And the fourth part of empathy is being able to communicate that you can see that in the other person. So empathy is not, here's your sandwich, let's go. Empathy says, I can see that there is something that's really bothering you. Why don't we take out at the moment, let's go and have a cup of coffee or something to drink, and let's just sit down. I'd love to hear what's going on with you and, provide you with an ear. Now, this is the very interesting part about empathy. Empathy is not you as a manager or someone who's holding someone accountable doing that person's work. It's not about you as the manager solving the problem for that person. You may solve the problem with that person, especially if it's a work-related problem. If it's a personal problem, hear them out, be a shoulder, be a bit of a sounding board. That is not your purview to fix or to deal with. So we want to move away from sympathy and we want to work with empathy. Now a lot of people will go, but Innocent, it's work. I don't want to have to deal with people's personal stuff. I don't want to have to deal with all these big emotions. But I want to provide you with an alternative perspective. It's called intellectual empathy. And that is less about sitting in emotion with people, if that's not your thing, but asking the same questions we ask as an empathic person, because we want to understand what is the problem. Because if I don't understand what's the problem, I don't understand the impact it'll have on this person's work and how we can get this thing right side up again. So recently I read a book, one of many, called Crucial Accountability by Patterson et al. And they've got the most beautiful model in there. It's called the 6-source model. Because you see what happens is when we don't have empathy and something goes wrong with someone else, then we go, oh, there's Jack Sprat again. It's, he's just being him. You know how difficult he is. He's never great on a Monday. There's always a story we tell ourselves. And that story normally includes judgment and precludes empathy. So we have to ask questions about why is he not great on a Monday? What's going on with him? Where can we maybe jump in to help provide support, especially if there's a EAP or an HR department? But if I'm going to talk you through the 6-source model, I'd like you to understand quickly what it is about. I want you to imagine a diagram, and you've got a little spreadsheet. It's got 2 columns and 3 rows. And the 6-source model, the 2 columns, one is motivation, the other one is capability. Then for each of those, there is a personal, social, and structural perspective that has to be taken into account. Now, what happens is when we take a look at Jack Sprat and why ever he's not great on a Monday. We have to ask 6 questions based on this model. If we take a look at the motivation column, we've got to ask, is there personal motivation? Does Jack Sprat want to be good on Mondays? Does he want to be here? Does he want to be doing this job? What's that all about? The next level of motivation is around a social impact. Is there peer pressure in this case to do or not do? So to give you an example, so many IT implementations have, gone to ruins because the group that has to use the IT system doesn't want it and doesn't believe in it. And therefore they subtly sabotage without even knowing it, just by a lack of enthusiasm and engagement. They already start sabotaging the use of that system. So does Jack Sprat have peer pressure from a social perspective that pulls down or that detracts from his motivation? The third and final one item under motivation is structural. And this is the carrots and sticks thing. So does the structural rewards in the organization improve or detract from his ability to have great motivation? And I'm going to give you my most famous example of this. So many companies where we bill by the hour, people are measured and rewarded on billability. Then something comes along, whether it's a social initiative or whether it is knowledge sharing. Then the manager will come to me and say to me, I don't understand why my guys won't participate in knowledge sharing, or they say they participate, but they never prepare properly. Well, that's because they're not being rewarded for those things. They're only being rewarded for billability. So they're pumping on billability 8 hours a day. Then they want to come back and try and prepare, if they're even interested, to work on knowledge sharing. So you can see how motivation can be impacted further than just how difficult a person is trying to be. I think very often that's sort of the narrative we fall into. Right? The next column is ability. The first layer, again, as with the previous column, is personal. Can Jack Sprat do the job? Is this something that he has the skills and the training to do? Next up, again, social. How do others impact his ability to do the job? Well, maybe he is dependent on someone else to pass on work to him. Maybe he is waiting for sign off from someone. So there are social perspectives here that are stopping him from doing his job. And if he's not able to escalate that anywhere, then we are in trouble. And we can see that actually it's not that he doesn't want to. It's not a personal motivation issue. It is a social ability issue. Lastly, structural. Are there structures, environments, tools that he does not have? So, for example, if you have a consultant who needs to work at a client office, if they don't have a laptop notebook, then they're not going to be able to do it. So it doesn't help the organization goes and buys the best of breed desktop, but the person's never at the office because they're forever at the client. And this we can also see in policies, procedures, a whole bunch of structural issues that are set up for one way of doing things when actually what the business needs is quite the other. And I think especially when businesses are going through a growth spurt, this can be quite a big factor. So that is an absolutely fabulous model. And I really think that it really provides us with ample opportunity to really get to understand why people are not performing. Why are they not as accountable? Because I think often we go to they're a bad person and a poor performer instead of taking a look at all these issues. But there's no way to understand the motivation and capability of someone if we're not going to have a discussion with them. And when we have the discussion, that is when we have an understanding of who they are. So a weekly coffee or once a month coffee, just on a social base, just to understand where they're coming from and who they are, and then moving closer and having discussions about when you get stuck, how can I help you, right? Just building those social connections, seeing the person as more than just a cog in the larger wheel. That establishes the trust that then allows people to open up when something has gone wrong and they need assistance. And so from that perspective, the only way to reach that is empathy. Remember, not sympathy, but empathy, where I really connect with someone with what they need, with what's going wrong, and then I help them to help themselves out of that position. And I hope that was meaningful to you. I hope that I've given empathy a bit of a different perspective and not just the touchy-feely version, but one that shows how data also can help us to make sure that we find out why people aren't performing and how we close those gaps. And so if I don't believe there are any comments this morning, please remember, if you've enjoyed this, we share these on all of our streaming and social media platforms. Also, let us know if there's a topic that you'd like us to cover with regards to accountability. And then, where's my coffee? It's nice and cold in here. Until next week, I look forward to seeing you at the Performance Cafe.